Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy-Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. So what exactly is Sleepy-Time Tales? What is it for? What is this strange thing, this strange idea, this podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to? But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Sleepy-Time Tales is intended to be used as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night, or maybe sometimes just background noise or company. That's why I make these episodes quite long, so that I'm here for you without any pressure of the end coming. As far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage with the show. The primary idea is that it gives you something to focus on, a story or an event that lets you keep your mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties, to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep when it comes for you. But maybe you need something a bit different. Maybe you just need some kind of background noise. Maybe you like white noise or the sound of the wind in the trees or the ocean or the rain, or maybe just some boring dude droning on in the background. Just relax, listen to the story, don't try to force the sleep, and keep a light mental grip on the thread of the story and allow the need for sleep to come for you. I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode. But don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night with us, this probably won't work for you. It'll probably take a few nights for you to get used to listening to my voice. Maybe my accent is strange to you. Maybe one episode just isn't long enough. Or maybe your problem isn't going to sleep. Maybe your problem is waking up in the middle of the night. What I recommend, because it's what works for me, is to let the podcast run all night. Download a whole bunch of episodes into your podcatcher of choice, put them on a playlist, and then when you go to bed, start them up and let them go. This way, if you wake up in the middle of the night, you'll find it still playing, and you can just carry on listening and allow yourself to drift straight back to sleep again. You can even do something similar if you wake up before your alarm, 60 minutes or as little as 30 minutes. What that happens with me, I just carry on listening and I go back to sleep again. And you may wonder what the point is. How useful is another 30 minutes of sleep? And I've got to tell you that there's something about allowing yourself to relax that close to the alarm that's satisfying on a whole new level. I've actually had people thank me for the suggestion because it's so counterintuitive and so effective for a lot of people. And it's important as you're listening that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you. So give it a chance. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to take a few minutes of your time. If you would like to help me support Sleepy Time Tales, to keep it going out to thousands of insomniacs just like you, please consider supporting it on Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is a monthly support that not only helps me keep the lights on, but can also get you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. From as little as $2 a month, you get weekly access to early release on the main episodes, so that you get your fresh sleep aid on a Wednesday instead of a Sunday. And $5 gets you weekly bonus minisodes, special edits, and a monthly megasode, which is all the month's releases in one big listen. If monthly seems a big ask, then you can also make once-off tips through the tip jar on the website. I've also got some merchandise up on the TeePublic store, which you can reach through the show notes or via the website. And a lot of that stuff isn't even Sleepy Time Tales branded, so if you want to get a cool t-shirt with a nice theme on it, and you don't have to explain to people what Sleepy Time Tales is, there's stuff there for you. Another massive way to help the show is simply to spread the word. If you know someone who's struggling to sleep, you can just tell them about the show. So we can work together to help improve people's lives. Also a reminder that I've taken up podcast editing and post-production. So if you want to start a podcast or have a podcast and don't want to do all the really boring, annoying stuff, get a hold of me at my email and I will figure out the best way that I can help you in the most cost-effective and easy way possible. And last but not least, of course, I've got to shout out the music, which is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiko. Their work is available on their website at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. Thanks for taking the time. Let's get back to the show. We return tonight to Memoirs of Extraordinary Popular Delusions by Charles Mackay. We pick up on the Mississippi scheme. In the midst of this financial confusion, law appeared upon the scene. No man felt more deeply than the regent the deplorable state of the country, but no man could be more averse from putting his shoulders manfully to the wheel. He disliked business. He signed official documents without proper examination, and trusted to others what he should have undertaken himself. The cares inseparable from his high office were burdensome to him. He saw that something was necessary to be done, but he lacked the energy to do it, and had not the virtue enough to sacrifice his case and his pleasures in the attempt. No wonder that with this character he listened favourably to the mighty projects so easy of execution, of the clever adventurer whom he had formerly known, and whose talents he appreciated. When Law presented himself at court, he was most cordially received. He offered 2 memorials to the regent, in which he set forth the evils that had befallen France, owing to an insufficient currency, at different times depreciated. He asserted that a metallic currency, unaided by paper money, was wholly inadequate to the wants of a commercial country, and particularly cited the examples of Great Britain and Holland to show the advantages of paper. He used many sound arguments on the subject of credit, and proposed, as a means of restoring that of France, then at so low an ebb among the nations, that he should be allowed to set up a bank which should have the management of the royal revenues, and issue notes, both on that and on landed security. He further proposed that this bank should be administered in the king's name, but subject to the control of commissioners, to be named by the States General. While these memorials were under consideration, Law translated into French his essay on money and trade, and used every means to extend through the nation his renown as a financier. He soon became talked of. The confidence of the regent spread abroad as praise, and everyone expected great things of Monsieur Lass. The French pronounced his name in this manner to avoid the ungallic sound or. After the failure of his scheme, the wags said the nation was lassé de Louis, and proposed that he should in future be known by the name of Monsieur Hélas. On the 5th of May, 1716, a royal edict was published, by which Law was authorized, in conjunction with his brother, to establish a bank under the name of Law and Company, the notes of which should be received in payment of the taxes. The capital was fixed at 6 million livres, in 12,000 shares of 500 each, purchasable 1/4 in specie and the remainder in billets d'état. It was not thought expedient to grant him the whole of the privileges prayed for in his memorials, until experience should have shown their safety and advantage. Law was now on the high road to fortune. The study of 30 years was brought to guide him in the management of his bank. He made all his notes payable at sight, and in the coin current at the time they were issued. This last was a masterstroke of policy, and immediately rendered his notes more valuable than the precious metals. The latter were constantly liable to depreciation by the unwise tampering of the government. 1,000 livres of silver might be worth their nominal value one day, and be reduced 1/6 the next. But a note of Law's bank retained its original value. He publicly declared at the same time that a banker deserved death if he made issues without having sufficient security to answer all demands. The consequence was that his notes advanced rapidly in public estimation, and were received at 1% more than the specie. It was not long before the trade of the country felt the benefit. Languishing commerce began to lift up her head. The taxes were paid with greater regularity and less murmuring, and a degree of confidence was established that could not fail, if it continued to become still more advantageous. In the course of a year, Law's notes rose to 15%, while the billets d'état, or notes issued by the government as security for the debts contracted by the extravagant Louis XIV, were at a discount of no less than 78.5%. The comparison was too great in the favor of Law not to attract the attention of the whole kingdom, and his credit extended itself day by day. Branches of his bank were almost simultaneously established at Lyon, Rochelle, Tours, Amiens, and Orléans. The regent appears to have been utterly astonished at his success, and gradually to have conceived the idea that paper, which could so aid a metallic currency, could entirely supersede it. Upon this fundamental error he afterwards acted. In the meantime, Law commenced the famous project which has handed his name down to posterity. He proposed to the regent, who could refuse him nothing, to establish a company that should have the exclusive privilege of trading to the great river Mississippi and the province of Louisiana on its western bank. The country was supposed to abound in the precious metals, and the company, supported by the profits of their exclusive commerce, were to be the sole farmers of the taxes and sole coiners of money. Letters patent were issued, incorporating the company, in August 1717, The capital was divided into 200,000 shares of 500 livres each, the whole of which might be paid in billets de temps at their nominal value, although worth no more than the 160 livres on the market. It was now that the frenzy of speculating began to seize upon the nation. Law's bank had effected so much good that any promises for the future which he thought proper to make were readily believed. The regent every day conferred new privileges upon the fortunate projector. The bank obtained the monopoly of the sale of tobacco, the sole right of refinage of gold and silver, and was finally erected into the Royal Bank of France. Amid the intoxication of success, both Law and the regent forgot the maxim so loudly proclaimed by the former, that a banker deserved death who made issues of paper without the necessary funds to provide for them. As soon as the bank, from a private, became a public institution, the regent caused a fabrication of notes to the amount of 1,000 millions of livres. This was the first departure from sound principles, and one for which Law is not justly blamable. While the affairs of the bank were under his control, the issues had never exceeded 60 million. Whether Law opposed the inordinate increase is not known, but as it took place as soon as the bank was made a royal establishment, it is but fair to lay the blame of the change of the system upon the regent. Law found that he lived under despotic government, but he was not yet aware of the pernicious influence which such a government could exercise upon so delicate a framework as that of credit. He discovered it afterwards to his cost, but in the meantime suffered himself to be impelled by the regent to courses which his own reason must have disapproved. With a weakness most culpable, he lent his aid in inundating the country with paper money, which, based upon no solid foundation, was sure to fall sooner or later. The extraordinary present fortune dazzled his eyes and prevented him from seeing the evil day that would burst over his head when once, from any cause or other, the alarm was sounded. The Parliament were from the first jealous of his influence as a foreigner, and had besides their misgivings as to the safety of his projects. As his influence extended, their animosity increased. D'Aguesseau, the Chancellor, was unceremoniously dismissed by the regent for his opposition to the vast increase of paper money, and the constant depreciation of the gold and silver coin of the realm. This only served to augment the enmity of the Parliament, and when D'Argenson, a man devoted to the interests of the regent, was appointed to the vacant chancellorship and made at the same time the Minister of Finance, they became more violent than ever. The first measure of the new minister caused a further depreciation of the coin. In order to extinguish the billet d'etat, it was ordered that the persons bringing to the mint 4,000 livres in specie and 1,000 livres in billet d'etat should receive back coin to the amount of 5,000 livres. D'Argenson plumed himself mightily upon thus creating 5,000 new and smaller livres out of the 4,000 old and larger ones, being too ignorant of the true principles of trade and credit to be aware of the immense injury he was inflicting upon both. The Parliament saw at once the impolicy and danger of such a system, and made repeated remonstrances to the regent. The latter refused to entertain their petitions, when the Parliament, by a bold and very unusual stretch of authority, commanded that no money should be received in payment but that of the old standard. The regent summoned a lit to justice and annulled the decree. The Parliament resisted and issued another. Again the regent exercised his privilege and annulled it, till the Parliament, stung to the fiercer opposition, passed another decree, dated August 12th, 1718, by which they forbade the Bank of Law to have any concern, either direct or indirect, in the administration of the revenue, prohibited all foreigners under heavy penalties from interfering, either in their own names or in that of others, in the management of the finances of the state. The Parliament considered Law to be the author of all the evil, and some of the chancellors, in the virulence of their enmity, proposed they should be brought to trial, and if found guilty be hung at the gates of the Palais de Justice. Law, in great alarm, fled to the Palais Royal, and threw himself on the protection of the regent, praying that measures might be taken to reduce the Parliament to obedience. The regent had nothing so much at heart, both on that account and because of the disputes that had arisen relative to the legitimation of the Duke of Maine and the Count of Toulouse, the sons of the late king. The Parliament was ultimately overawed by the arrest of the president and two of the councillors who were sent to distant prisons. Thus the first cloud upon Law's prospects blew over. Freed from apprehension of personal danger, he devoted his attention to his famous Mississippi project, the shares of which were rapidly rising, in spite of the Parliament. At the commencement of the year 1719, an edict was published, granting to the Mississippi Company the exclusive privilege of trading to the East Indies, China, and the South Seas, and to all the possessions of the French East India Company, established by Colbert. The company, in consequence of this great increase of their business, assumed, as more appropriate, the title of Company of the Indies, and created 50,000 new shares. The prospects now held out by Law were most magnificent. He promised a yearly dividend of 200 livres upon each share of 500, which, as the shares were paid for in billet d'etat at the nominal value, but worth only 100 livres, was at the rate of about 120% profit. The public enthusiasm, which had been so long rising, could not resist a vision so splendid. At least 300,000 applications were made for the 50,000 new shares, and Law's house in the Rue de Quicampeau was beset from morning to night by the eager applicants. As it was impossible to satisfy them all, it was several weeks before a list of the fortunate new stockholders could be made out, during which time the public impatience rose to a pitch of frenzy. Dukes, marquises, counts with their duchesses, marchionesses, and countesses waited in the streets for hours every day before Mr. Law's door to know the result. At last, to avoid the jostling of the plebeian crowd, which to the number of thousands filled the whole thoroughfare, they took apartments in the adjoining houses that they might be continually near the temple, whence the new Plutus was diffusing wealth. Every day the value of the old shares increased, and the fresh applications, induced by the golden dreams of the whole nation, became so numerous that it was deemed advisable to create no less than 300,000 new shares, at 5,000 livres each, in order that the regent might take advantage of the popular enthusiasm to pay off the national debt. For this purpose the sum of 1,500 millions of livres was necessary. Such was the eagerness of the nation that thrice the sum would have been subscribed if the government had authorized it. Law was now at the zenith of his prosperity, and the people were rapidly approaching the zenith of their infatuation. The highest and the lowest classes were alike filled with a vision of boundless wealth. There was not a person of note among the aristocracy, with the exception of the Duke of Saint-Simon and Marshal Villars, who was not engaged in buying or selling stock. People of every age and sex and condition in life speculated in the rise and fall of the Mississippi bonds. The Rue de Quincampoix was the grand resort of the jobbers, and it being a narrow, inconvenient street, accidents continually occurred in it, from the tremendous pressure of the crowd. Houses in it, with in ordinary times 1,000 livres of yearly rent, yielded as much as 12 or 16,000. A cobbler who had a stall in it gained about 200 livres a day by letting it out, and furnishing writing materials to brokers and their clients. The story goes that a humpbacked man who stood in the street gained considerable sums by lending his hump as a writing desk to the eager speculators. The great concourse of persons who assembled to do business brought still a greater concourse of spectators. These again drew all the thieves and immoral characters of Paris to the spot, and constant riots and disturbances took place. At nightfall it was often found necessary to send a troop of soldiers to clear the street. Law, finding the inconvenience of his residence, removed to the Place Vendôme, whither the crowd of adjuteurs followed him. That spacious square soon became as thronged as the Rue de Quincampoix. From morning to night it presented the appearance of a fair. Booths and tents were erected for the transaction of business and the sale of refreshments, and gamblers with their roulette tables stationed themselves in the very middle of the place, and reaped a golden, or rather paper, harvest from the throng. The boulevards and public gardens were forsaken. Parties of pleasure took their walks, in preference in the Place Vendôme, which became the fashionable lounge of the idle, as well as the general rendezvous of the busy. The noise was so great all day that the Chancellor, whose court was situated in the square, complained to the Regent and the municipality that he could not hear the advocates. Law, when applied to, expressed his willingness to aid in the removal of the nuisance, and for this purpose entered into a treaty with the Prince de Carignan, the Hôtel de Soissons, which had a garden of several acres in the rear. A bargain was concluded by which Law became the purchaser of the hotel at an enormous cost, the prince reserving to himself the magnificent gardens as a new source of profit. They contained some fine statues and several fountains, and were altogether laid out with much taste. As soon as Law was installed in his new abode, an edict was published, forbidding all persons to buy or sell stock anywhere but in the gardens of the Hôtel de Soissons. In the midst, among the trees, about 500 small tents and pavilions were erected, for the convenience of the stock jobbers. Their various colours, the gay ribbons and banners which floated from them, the busy crowds which passed continually in and out, the incessant hum of voices, the noise, the music, and the strange mixture of business and pleasure on the countenance of the throng, all combined to give the place an air of enchantment that quite enraptured the Parisians. The Prince de Carignan made enormous profits while the delusion lasted. Each tent was let at the rate of 500 livres a month, and as there were at least 500 of them, his monthly revenue from this source alone must have amounted to 250,000 livres, or upwards of 10,000 pounds sterling. The honest old soldier, Marshal Villars, was so vexed to see the folly which had smitten his countrymen, that he could never speak with temper on the subject. Passing one day through the Place Vendôme in his carriage, the choleric gentleman was so annoyed at the infatuation of the people that he abruptly ordered his coachman to stop, and putting his head out of the carriage window, harangued them for full half an hour on their disgusting avarice. This was not a very wise proceeding on his part. Hisses and shouts of laughter resounded from every side, and jokes without number were aimed at him. There being at last strong symptoms that something more tangible was flying through the air, in the direction of his head, Marshall was glad to drive on. He never again repeated the experiment. Two sober, quiet, and philosophic men of letters, Monsieur de Lamotte and the Abbé Terrasson, congratulated each other that they at least were free from the strange infatuation. A few days afterwards, as the worthy Abbé was coming out of the Hotel de Soissons, whither he had gone to buy shares in the Mississippi, whom should he see but his friend Lamotte, entering for the same purpose? "Ha," said the Abbé, smiling. "Is that you?" "Yes," said Lamotte, pushing past him as fast as he was able. "And can that be you?" The next time the two scholars met, they talked of philosophy, of science, and of religion. But neither had courage for a long time to breathe one syllable about the Mississippi. At last, when it was mentioned, they agreed that a man ought never to swear against his doing any one thing, and that there was no sort of extravagance of which even a wise man was not capable. During this time, Law, the new Plutus, had become all at once the most important personage of the state. The antechambers of the regent were forsaken by the courtiers. Peers, judges, and bishops thronged to the Hotel de Soissons. Officers of the army and navy, ladies of title and fashion, and everyone to whom hereditary rank or public employ gave a claim to precedence, were to be found waiting in his antechambers to beg for a portion of his India stock. Law was so pestered that he was unable to see 1/10 part of the applicants, and every maneuver that ingenuity could suggest was employed to gain access to him. Peers whose dignity would have been outraged if the regent had made them wait half an hour for an interview were content to wait 6 hours for the chance of seeing Monsieur Law. Enormous fees were paid to his servants, if they would merely announce their names. Ladies of rank employed the blandishments of their smiles for the same object, but many of them came day after day for a fortnight before they could obtain an audience. When Law accepted an invitation, he was sometimes so surrounded by ladies, all asking to have their names put down in his lists as shareholders in the new stock, that in spite of his well-known and habitual gallantry, he was obliged to tear himself away par force. The most ludicrous stratagems were employed to have an opportunity of speaking to him. One lady, who had striven in vain during several days, gave up in despair all attempts to see him at his own house, but ordered her coachman to keep a strict watch whenever she was out in her carriage, and if he saw Mr. Law coming, to drive against a post and upset her. The coachman promised obedience, and for 3 days the lady was driven incessantly through the town, praying inwardly for the opportunity to be overturned. At last she espied Mr. Law, and pulling the string, called out to the coachman, "Upset us now, for God's sake, upset us now." The coachman drove against a post. The lady screamed, the coach was overturned, and Law, who had seen the accident, hastened to the spot to render assistance. The cunning dame was led into the Hotel de Soissons, where she soon thought it advisable to recover from her fright, and after apologizing to Mr. Law, confessed to stratagem. Law smiled and entered the lady in his books as the purchaser of a quantity of India stock. Another story is told of a Madame de Boucher, who, knowing that Mr. Law was at dinner at a certain house, proceeded thither in her carriage, gave the alarm of fire. The company started from table, and Law among the rest, but seeing one lady making all haste into the house towards him, while everybody else was scampering away, he suspected the trick and ran off in another direction. Other anecdotes are related, which, even though they may be a little exaggerated, are nevertheless worth preserving, as showing the spirit of that singular period. The curious reader may find an anecdote of the eagerness of the French ladies to retain Law in their company, which will make him blush or smile, according as he happens to be very modest or the reverse. It is related in the letters of Madame Charlotte Elizabeth de Bavière, Duchess of Orléans. The regent was one day mentioning, in the presence of D'Argenson, d'Abbé de Bois, and other persons, that he was desirous of deputing some lady, of the rank at least of a duchess, to attend upon his daughter at Modena. But, added he, I do not know exactly where to find one. No, replied one in affected surprise. I can tell you where you to find every duchess in France. You have only to go to Mr. Law's. You will see every one in his antechamber. Mr. Chirac, a celebrated physician, had bought stock at an unlucky period, and was very anxious to sell out. Stock, however, continued to fall for 2 or 3 days, much to his alarm. His mind was filled with the subject when he was suddenly called upon to attend a lady who imagined herself unwell. He arrived, was shown upstairs, and felt the lady's pulse. It falls, good God, it falls continually, said he, musingly, while the lady looked up in his face, all anxiety for his opinion. Oh, Monsieur de Chirac, said she, starting to her feet and ringing the bell for assistance. I am dying. It falls, it falls. What falls? Inquired the doctor in amazement. My pulse, said the lady. I must be dying. Calm your apprehensions, my dear madam, said Monsieur de Chirac. I was speaking of the stocks. The truth is I have been a great loser and my mind is so disturbed, I hardly know what I have been saying. The price of shares sometimes rose 10 or 20% in the course of a few hours, and many persons in the humbler walks of life who had risen poor in the morning went to bed in affluence. An extended holder of stock, being taken ill, sent his servant to sell 250 shares at 8,000 livres each, the price at which they were then quoted. The servant went, and on his arrival at the Jardin de Soissons, found that in the interval the price had risen to 10,000 livres. The difference of 2,000 livres on the 250 shares, amounting to 500,000 livres or 20,000 pounds sterling, he very coolly transferred to his own use, and giving the remainder to his master, set out on the same evening for another country. Law's coachman in a very short time made money enough to set up a carriage of his own, and requested permission to leave his service. Law, who esteemed the man, begged of him as a favour that he would endeavour, before he went, to find a substitute as good as himself. The coachman consented, and in the evening brought 2 of his former comrades, telling Mr. Law to choose between them, and that he would take the other. Cookmaids and footmen were now and then as lucky, and in the full-blown pride of their easily acquired wealth, made the most ridiculous mistakes. Preserving the language and manners of their old, with the finery of their new station, they afforded continual subjects for the pity of the sensible, contempt of the sober, and the laughter of everybody. But the folly and meanness of the higher ranks of society were still more disgusting. One instance alone, related by the Duke of Saint-Simon, will show the unworthy avarice which infected the whole of society. A man with the name of Andre, without character or education, had by a series of well-timed speculations in Mississippi bonds gained enormous wealth in an incredibly short space of time. As Saint-Simon expresses it, he had amassed mountains of gold. As he became rich, he grew ashamed of the lowness of his birth, and anxious above all things to be allied to nobility. He had a daughter, an infant only 3 years of age, and he opened a negotiation with the aristocratic and needy family of Doyce, that this child should, upon certain conditions, marry a member of that house. The Marquis d'Oise, to his shame, consented, and promised to marry her himself on her attaining the age of 12, if the father would pay him down the sum of 100,000 crowns, and 20,000 livres every year, until the celebration of the marriage. The Marquis was himself in his 33rd year. The scandalous bargain was duly signed and sealed, the stock jobber furthermore agreeing to settle upon his daughter, on the marriage day, a fortune of several millions. The Duke of Brancas, the head of the family, was present throughout the negotiation, and shared in all the profits. Saint-Simon, who treats the matter with levity becoming what he thought so good a joke, adds that people did not spare their animadversions to this beautiful marriage, and further informs us that the project fell to the ground some months afterwards by the overthrow of law and the ruin of the ambitious Monsieur Andre. It would appear, however, that the noble family never had the honesty to return the 100,000 crowns. And I think I'm going to leave it there. I'm sure next time we get back to this, we're going to find out exactly what happens to Monsieur Law. And if you're curious, you can, as always, pick it up where we're leaving off on Project Gutenberg. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.